Agen Allwedd Cave Incident, June 9, 1974, South Wales. Two cave divers, 26-year-old Roger Solari and 23-year-old Martin Farr, set out to map the dangerous and barely explored underwater system inside Agen Allwedd. Another explorer, John Parker, had previously turned back at the third sump, unable to go farther. But Roger and Martin wanted to push the limit. Because Roger had a knee injury, Martin went ahead alone on the first attempt. Even reaching the first sump was brutal, almost a mile of crawling just to get there. The first two sumps were short, 249 feet and 82 feet. Martin pushed through them without problems. Then came sump 3, an uncharted 850-foot dive, a tight, winding tunnel of pitch-black water. Martin forced his way through and emerged into a tunnel no one knew existed, 1,800 feet of twisting, zigzagging passage that led him to a fourth sump. He had discovered an entirely new section of the system. But Martin's air was dangerously low. It took him 4 to 5 hours just to get out alive. He returned home and immediately planned another attempt, this time with Roger. June 15, 1974, the fatal attempt. Both men returned with extra tanks. They dove sump 4 together, laying guideline as they went. But Roger's reel ran out at 400 feet, and he was struggling. Sinus issues, smaller tank, slower progress. Instead of turning back, they made a critical mistake. They continued deeper into the sump using Martin's guideline, breaking the cardinal law of cave diving, the rule of thirds. 1/3 of air for entry, 1/3 for exit, 1/3 for emergencies. Ignoring this rule meant one thing: they no longer had guaranteed exit air. Martin believed Roger, with his smaller tank, would turn around, but Roger didn't. They reached a gravel wall where Martin hoped for an air pocket. He pushed ahead another 29 feet. Nothing. A dead end. When Martin returned, Roger was still waiting, deeper than he should have been. Martin signaled immediately, "Turn back now." Martin's main tank emptied first. He switched to his reserve, just enough to cover 8 to 50 feet through sump 3, 300 feet through sump 4, and reach a small backup tank he had stashed earlier. He surfaced from sump 4 and waited in the dark. Roger never appeared. After 20 minutes, Martin knew something was wrong. Martin dove back, pulling the guideline. At 430 feet, the line ended, cut clean. Searchers later concluded this: Roger probably stopped here to change tanks. In the process, he got tangled in the guideline, panicked, and cut the rope to free himself. With the silt clouded and zero visibility, he likely swam in the wrong direction and exhausted the last of his air. Martin escaped the cave alive and alerted authorities. Teams searched for days. Martin joined them, guiding divers through the same deadly passages. But visibility, depth, and danger made it impossible. Roger Solari's body was not found until 1986, 12 years later. It was too risky to recover, so it remains in the cave to this day. A plaque now honors him. In 1987, another diver eventually found the air pocket Martin had hoped for, 875 feet into sump 4, and named it the Against All Odds Chamber. Martin never again broke the rule of thirds. He went on to become one of the most respected cave divers in the world. Today, Agen Allwedd's entrance is locked, accessible only to highly qualified explorers. Jiudun Cave Deep Dive, April 18, 2014. Jiudun Cave, China. Wang Yuan and Wang Tao stood at the entrance of Jiudun Cave, preparing for the deepest dive of their lives. They weren't beginners. Both had completed more than a dozen dives in the cave's northern entrance, but that day, they wanted to break their personal record. Their goal? Extend the existing 525-foot guideline by another 35 feet, down to a terrifying 558 feet. They knew this meant leaving the guideline temporarily, the most dangerous decision a diver can make at that depth. But confidence won over caution. To prepare, Yuan had already done a 500-foot practice dive in open water. Tao planned to join him, but fell ill and skipped it. Still, both agreed they were ready. When they descended that morning, they immediately noticed a problem. Visibility was severely reduced. Heavy rain had turned the normally clear water into a murky green haze. On a good day, they could see 50 feet. That day, they could barely see 6. But turning back wasn't in their plans. They followed protocol perfectly, switching tanks at their stage depths, each containing the exact gas mixture needed to survive the pressure. A friend named Pei waited near the entrance in case anything went wrong. Yuan led the descent. Tao followed, marking arrow pointers along the line so they could safely return. At 538 feet, Yuan suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. The early signs of losing consciousness. They'd gone far enough. They turned back immediately. But when Yuan reached the point where the guideline should have been, it was gone. The murky water had swallowed it completely. Both men froze. Breathing hard, they searched desperately. Finally, Yuan's fingers brushed against the line. They had found it. Losing the line at 500+ feet doesn't just cause panic. Their hard breathing had consumed more air than normal. Yuan's deep-depth cylinder was almost empty. He was forced to switch back to his main tank, a surface air mix, extremely risky at that pressure. Still, they ascended. At 393 feet, Yuan began trembling uncontrollably. Their next set of emergency tanks were at 243 feet, still 150 feet away. Then things got worse. Out of the darkness, Yuan saw Tao's light, motionless under a rock. Visibility was so poor that Tao had swum straight into it and become wedged in place. Tao signaled at his throat. He was running out of air. Yuan immediately offered his emergency regulator. Tao freed himself, and the two continued sharing air, but now had only minutes left. At this point, Yuan was dragging Tao by the arm. Both were barely conscious. Suddenly, Yuan looked up and saw Tao drifting past him, rising uncontrollably toward the surface, a sign of complete blackout. Yuan chased after him through the dark water, but Tao vanished instantly. Realizing he was seconds away from running out of air himself, Yuan reached the next set of cylinders, switched tanks, and went back down searching. No sign of Tao. His new tank also began to drop. He ascended again to the next set of cylinders, tanks meant only for shallow depths. Using them at depth would cause nitrogen narcosis, and still, Yuan pushed back down. At some point, he blacked out briefly underwater. That was the final warning. He ascended again, too fast, doing only 3 hours of decompression than the required 4 hours. A deadly mistake, but the only way he could survive. When he surfaced, he told Pei everything. Pei dove in to help, but was not able to find Tao. When he returned, he quickly realized Yuan himself was collapsing, vomiting, shaking, and losing coordination. Classic signs of decompression sickness and nitrogen narcosis. Tao was gone. Rescue divers needed another full day to assemble the correct deep dive equipment. When they finally entered Jiudun Cave, they found Tao's body at 176 feet, far above where he had blacked out and drifted upward. Yuan spent days in a decompression chamber. He survived. The Manchester Hole Surge. November 15th, 2005, North Yorkshire, England. Joseph Lister, along with his classmates Charlie and Amy, and a group of 14-year-old students, their math teacher, and a 17-year-old volunteer guide, arrived at the entrance of Manchester Hole, one of more than 20 openings into the Niddle Cave system. They dropped through the small opening known as Manchester Hole and immediately entered a massive underground hall, a chamber the size of a football field. The ceiling towered 50 feet above them, water pooled at their boots, and stalactites hung like jagged teeth. Everything felt calm, nothing suggested danger. The group moved onward following a muddy path and entered into a second smaller chamber having shallow water, then crawled down a 40-foot twisting tunnel on their hands and knees. Cold, muddy water soaked their clothes, but they reached a small space where they could stand again. Math teacher was the last to follow the group. Then the guide noticed something was wrong. The water level was rising. Fast. higher than he had ever seen inside this cave system. And it made no sense. There was no rain forecast, and outside the sky was clear. To make matters worse, the water kept rising, soon reaching above the knees of some students. The group was standing in freezing water, space shrinking around them. The guide didn't know why. He only knew they had seconds to turn back. They began retreating. The teacher went first. Students followed in single file, crawling back into the narrow tunnel. Then the disaster hit. A violent surge of icy water slammed into the chamber. It flooded the room in seconds. The teacher and 9 students were already inside the crawlway when the surge struck. But 3 were still in the chamber: the guide, Amy, and Joseph. They tried the tunnel, too crowded. They were forced back into the chamber. The water rose to their chests, then to their necks. Holding one last breath, all 3 pushed into the tunnel again. This time, the passage had cleared enough to move. The guide led. Amy crawled behind him. Joseph crawled last. At the narrow bend, the guide shoved Amy upward toward the teacher, saving her life. But in that same motion, Joseph didn't appear behind her. He was gone. The water kept rising. The teacher insisted they evacuate the remaining 10 students first. By the time anyone could attempt to return, the narrow crawlway was completely flooded. 10 minutes later, the group burst out of the entrance under a bright blue sky, windy, cold, but with not a single drop of rain. The cause of the flood stunned everyone. Strong winds had blasted across Scar House Reservoir, pushing thousands of gallons of water over the dam's edge. The sudden overflow surged into the river, and from there, straight into the cave system. In just 1 hour, the river rose 4 feet, too fast for the caves to drain. Normally, water slowly trickles through and seeps into the groundwater, but that day, the huge volume overwhelmed the cave's ability to drain, triggering flash flooding throughout the system in just a few minutes. Manchester Hole had flashed completely underwater in minutes. It took rescuers only 20 minutes to arrive. By then, the water inside the cave had already dropped back down, below knee level. Inside the tight, dark tunnel leading to the final chamber, they found the body of 14-year-old Joseph Lister, drowned in the pitch-black, airless passage. Joseph never had a chance.
I hope you guys are enjoying these videos. Do leave a like and subscribe, and watch another video from the playlist. Thanks!